Greetings and welcome to this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. My name is Joe Rubenstein and it is Wednesday, September 26th, and the Yankees, as I record this, have reduced their magic number to 3 as far as securing home field advantage in the wildcard game next week. With that 9-2 win last night in Tampa, any combination of Yankee wins and A's losses totaling 3 between now and Sunday, and that wildcard game will be in the Bronx as the Bombers try to pick up a head of steam here and somehow find a way to get past Oakland 1 week from tonight. You can follow us on Twitter @BombersPodcast is the handle. You can also send us questions. We'll try to answer each and every week in our mailbag segment here on the podcast. You can like us on Facebook, subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher. We're on Spotify as well, or give us a call, 646-854-4959. And as always, you can send your comments and questions to joe@BronxBombersPodcast.com. Really, however you'd like to engage with us. We love engaging with you. Coming up a little bit later on in our Twitter poll this week, some interesting results when we asked who you think should be our starting catcher in the wildcard game. And I'll answer a pair of fascinating questions from 2 of our followers, the first of whom thinks that I've been too hard on Aaron Boone. And the second question is about our infield without Didi, who injured his wrist while scoring the game-winning run that clinched a playoff spot. That's just typical 2018, isn't it? Also, he's the host of the Bronx Beat Podcast. Our good friend EJ Fagan rejoins the show to talk wildcard and more, and we'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly from this last week of action. All that and more coming up on today's Bronx Bombers. Back in a moment.
Bronx Bombers Trivia. Which of these 4 players became the next Yankee captain after the retirement of Lou Gehrig? Was it A, Mickey Mantle, B, Yogi Berra, C, Joe DiMaggio, or D, Thurman Munson? The answer coming up a little bit later in the podcast.
And now here's Joe with this week's main thing.
So this has been the best week for Yankee fans in a while. There's been stumbles and, of course, a Didi injury. We'll find out more today after the doctor's report, but we're starting to see this team hit again the way they're capable of, and I connect that to the return of Aaron Judge. Even though he hasn't caught fire yet, he lengthens that lineup, and if Stanton can get going, and Sanchez as well, then that could be enough to dispatch with Oakland in that game next week, which those games... Man, those games are so tense. It's like an out-of-body experience, honestly. I can't even say I enjoy them. But ready or not, here we go. 1 week from tonight, we find out if this season comes to an abrupt end or if we move on to face the Red Sox. But enough with the preamble. It's time to delve into the good, the bad, and the ugly as we take a hard look at this last week of action and see who delivered and who disappeared. Now, a guy I haven't talked about much this season so far because, he hasn't been a Yankee for very long. We just acquired him at the end of August. Headlines are good section. And no, it's not Luke Voit, although he's just had another insanely good week, hitting .348 with 4 home runs, a double, a walk, and 9 RBIs. Now, he now has 11 home runs and 25 RBIs as a Yankee in just 35 games. So he probably should be my headliner, but, since I focused on Voit last week, I want to say a few words in praise of Andrew McCutchen. And the 31-year-old has shown he still has plenty left in the tank and has effectively replaced Brett Gardner as our starting left fielder and leadoff hitter. And Gardy had a great game on Monday, replacing the injured Aaron Hicks. And again, last night, he had a big RBI and an amazing catch in center field. That injury to Hicks may not amount to very much. It sounds like it was a precautionary move after he felt some tightness in that hamstring. But McCutchen, in his 21 games with the Yankees, has an on-base percentage of .415. That's insane. And in just 71 at-bats, has 5 home runs, 9 RBIs, and 20 walks, and an OPS of 900. That's elite. And the Yankees are apparently already deliberating on whether or not he comes back to New York next year. You always want to be careful about awarding big multi-year contracts to guys that are in their 30s, and they'll turn 32 next month. But on the other hand, as long as his terms are reasonable, there's always a place on championship teams for savvy veterans like that who, can play the field well and give you professional at-bats. And that's what he is. He's a professional, and he's a very good fielder, and he's a very good clubhouse guy. So if the Yankees bring him back as our starting left fielder, that could be the end of Gardner's tenure on this team, which would be sad. Assuming Frazier recovers from his post-concussion migraines, that's a big if. And, if he's still having difficulty, I could could definitely see the Yankees bringing Gardner back for that final option year as our fourth outfielder. But I think if we get by Oakland, McCutchen's performance in the playoffs could definitely influence the Yankees' decision. And his postseason numbers with the Pirates were excellent. I mean, small sample size, just 3 wild card games and 1 NLDS. But he hit .321 with an OPS of 1,000 even. So this was another nice acquisition by Brian Cashman and could lead to a more extended relationship. On the pitching front, last night, he was shaky, but he got through it. I mean, Severino, he only gave up 2 runs, but there was that one inning after we scored 7 where he kind of spit the bit and seemed to get a little wild, but he recovered. And last Wednesday, in that victory over the Red Sox at the stadium, Severino definitely kept his name in the ring as far as who starts that wild card game. And this was big. I mean, it was a big deal because really the Red Sox have had Severino's number for a while now. So 7 strong innings, giving up only 1 run was very impressive against that potent lineup. And it didn't start auspiciously. Severino's first 6 pitches in that game were out of the strike zone, but he worked his way out of a 1-out second and third jam using that changeup, and overall yielded just 6 hits and struck out 6 Red Sox. So we'll see what the Yankees decide. I have a feeling, and this was echoed by the Yes broadcast team last night, that they're going to go with Severino against Oakland for 2 reasons that I think. One legitimate and one less so. The legitimate reason is that Happ has truly excelled against Boston, and starting Sevy next Wednesday night would give you Happ twice in the ALDS if we advance. The less legitimate reason is it would kind of insulate Boone and the Yankees from the charge if we go with Happ and lose, that the Yankees left their ace, Severino, on the bench. I'm actually kind of on the fence on this. In my view, the point of the season is not to win just a wild card game and get bounced. It's always to win a championship. So you may as well throw the dice on a resurgent Severino and hope for a big payoff. But we'll see what they decide, in a few days. Bad this week, despite a big grand slam against Boston in a losing effort in that final game of that series where the Red Sox clinched their 3rd straight division championship in the Bronx, has been Giancarlo Stanton. Not terrible. He had that grand slam and he also had a double last night, 3 walks this week. But Stanton is just striking out a lot again and hitting just 125 this week. On the pitching front, Masahiro Tanaka showed us once again why you can never quite trust him. He had a mediocre performance against Boston in that 3rd game in which, more likely than not, I think he pitched himself out of the wild card conversation with a real clunker, wasting that grand slam by Stanton and 7 walks by Red Sox starter Eduardo Rodriguez. I mean, when you give up a home run to light-hitting Brock Holt, I think just his 4th this year, you got problems. When Boston retook the lead, the inning right after the Stanton grand slam, that game was lost. And the bullpen was a mixed bag this week. We saw an awful performance on Sunday by both EJ Cole and Tommy Kahnle. That's to be expected. They should never have been brought into that game against the Orioles. That was a close game. That was a gaffe by Aaron Boone that we'll discuss in our mailbag segment later. But on Monday, the Yankees paid homage to Tampa by presenting a bullpen day in their house, and it was spectacular. Holder, Robertson, Betances, Green, all magnificent. Actually, Aroldis Chapman was also good. The only 2 runs were surrendered by Sonny Gray, and even though he gave up those 2 runs, he wasn't actually quite as bad as he can be. The ugly this week has to be Gary Sanchez, and I take no pleasure in this and hammering this guy again and again on this podcast, and he did have a good night last night. Let's say that right away. He had a big 3-run home run last night and another RBI single after that. Really good at-bats last night. I said this on Twitter. Before last night's home run, I couldn't even remember the last time I saw him get a ball out of the infield, but I'll deal with the Sanchez question in our Twitter poll section later. Now keep in mind, that section was recorded before last night's game, so some of the numbers there are slightly different this morning, but suffice it to say, certainly defensively, we've kind of reached a crisis point with Gary Sanchez, who seems to be just floundering behind the plate, continues to deteriorate defensively, where his problems were already severe. But we'll get into it later, both with our guest EJ Fagan and then with our Twitter poll, where spoiler alert, I say that Romine should be the starter a week from tonight in the wild card game. Look, if Sanchez catches fire here in this last week, then, maybe I'll change my tune, but he's going to have to deliver a lot more of what we saw last night. And even then, those passed balls, they scare me, man. They really do. Back in a moment. We are joined this week on Bronx Bombers by our friend EJ Fagan, host of the indispensable Bronx Beat Podcast, which if you haven't, all of you guys should check out. Highly recommend it for in-depth analysis of the Yankees. EJ, it's great having you back on the show. How you doing?
Great, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, here we go again with another wild card game. So I guess the biggest question on everyone's mind is who starts that game. And it seems to me the fundamental dilemma is this. In all likelihood, based on the last couple of months, Hap gives us the best chance to win that game. But the goal here is to win a championship, not just a wild card game. And really not having Hap twice against Boston really hurts our chances in that series if we get by Oakland. And, on the other hand, Hap didn't really look so hot on Sunday against AAA Baltimore. So it's going to be one of those three guys, Severino, Tanaka, or Hap. Who would be your choice to start the wild card game and why?
So let's think about what you want in a wild card game starter. And I think the answer is probably best starter. The best player on your pitching staff should begin that game. And there's this open question of who is the best starter on the Yankee staff. Is it J. Happ, who has been really great recently and has had a pretty solid season overall and a pretty solid last couple of seasons? Or Luis Severino, who we all think is the better pitcher, like in a vacuum, but has had kind of a rocky second half. And up until last Severino start, I was really willing to be on the side of saying put Tanaka or J. Happ in there, probably Tanaka. Don't let him see more than 18 batters and let the bullpen handle the rest of the game. And then a couple of things changed. Number one, Severino had a really good start against the Red Sox last week. Went 7 innings. He was never really, on the cusp of giving up a lot of runs. Didn't walk players. Didn't allow any home runs. I mean, it was just he looked great. But the other thing is I saw some data, and the data plotted 3 variables for Luis Severino over time. The first variable was ERA, the second was FIP, field independent pitching, and the third was xFIP, which is field independent pitching, but also throws in some stuff like ground ball rate, line drive rate, and some other things that might determine how good of a player he is. And what you see is a huge spike in everything in July and early August, right? He was bad. Severino was just legitimately terrible for a long period of time, and the peripheral statistics suggested that, and the ERA suggested that, and it all made sense. And then toward the end of August and the last couple of starts in September, what you've seen is the ERA has gone down but remained elevated over his last 5 or 10 starts. But all of the other stats are right back down to his last year and a half or so, basically peak Severino. So he's striking out batters well. He's not allowing too many home runs. He's not allowing that many walks. He's not going deep into games. But on an inning-by-inning basis, he looks like the old Severino. Some other stats that have kind of come back to normal Severino. His swinging strike rate is back up. And then he has the really great start against the Red Sox, a really tough team. I think he's back. I think I'm ready to say Luis Severino is the best starter on the Yankees, and therefore he should start the wild card game.
So the fact that Oakland hit Severino pretty hard earlier this month, I mean, does that give you pause, or it's just not enough information?
Yeah, I don't think it's enough information. I think the fact that it's Oakland makes you a little bit worried, right? Oakland hammered him, but Oakland's hammered a lot of pitchers lately. They're really good. Boston's pretty good too. Boston's maybe better than Oakland as far as an offensive ball club, and he did really well against them. So, it gives me a little bit of pause. I think maybe I'll regret it if Severino gives up 5 runs in the first couple of innings. But it's not like Tanaka and J. Happ are clearly better than him in any real way. I think he is a pretty good bet. And if a really good team like Oakland hits him, maybe that's just because Oakland's really good.
Yeah, and we also have the bullpen to back him up if he doesn't do well, which is exactly what happened last year.
We're talking about maybe 4 innings maximum. If Severino is still pitching the 6th inning, I seriously question Aaron Boone's judgment.
Now, it's been said that Happ and Zach Britton, both unrestricted free agents this winter, would like to stay in New York next year. They've both been pretty good acquisitions for the Yankees. Are those 2 guys that you would like to see return in pinstripes next year?
Definitely. I mean, we need starters. We need a lot of starters right now. The Yankees have a almost crisis on their hands in terms of their starting pitching in the medium term. Maybe Justice Sheffield is kind of one of those guys, but Jordan Montgomery is not going to be back for most of next season. CC Sabathia is touch and go, because of his age and his health. I think J. Happ's been really good. He's old. He probably is not a long-term commitment. I think you pay him whatever you need to pay him to get him here for a little bit, and you can kind of count on him to, hopefully be a above average or better starter.
And Zach Britton as well?
I think Zach Britton is less of a crisis of the Yankee bullpen, but he's looked good these last couple of weeks. I wouldn't argue with bringing Zach Britton back, but I think he's a lower priority. If I had to choose between spending a bunch of money on Manny Machado or a bunch of money on 3 or 4 starting pitchers, or spending a bunch of money on Zach Britton, I'd spend it on the other ones first. But it's not my money, so I'll take them.
Now, Cashman has pulled off a few heists in his day, but dealing Shreve and Gallegos for Luke Voit is looking like one of his best. Voit has been just a man on fire with the Yankees, and we do have control over him for, I think, 3 more years. Now, we've seen things like this before. We saw it back in '98 with Shane Spencer. We saw it 2 years ago with Sanchez. So what's your take on the Luke Voit offensive explosion? I mean, when does a small sample size become large enough so that we can start to trust what we're seeing?
I think that a small sample size, in terms of the rest of the season, right, is he going to be a good player in the next month and a half? I don't think there's any reason to say that he wouldn't be, right? The league clearly has not adjusted back to him. He clearly is hitting the ball very hard and is great. I think the real question is what happens over a full season. What happens when the league starts to try to figure out Luke Voit? What happens when he deals with some injuries or is playing every day for 150 games, etc. Those are all unanswered questions, and there's a reason why we got him for the package you just mentioned. So I color my skepticism a little bit. I think in the offseason, this is something Brian Cashman should be thinking about. How much can I trust Luke Voit? Do I have a backup plan, et cetera? How does Miguel Andujar look at first base? But for the moment, he's amazing. I'll take it. Like, for the moment, our number 7 hitter, first baseman afterthought is slugging 600. Like, I'm not going to argue with that.
So looking big picture, EJ, has Cashman, in designing this team, undervalued defense? I mean, I realize the error is kind of a dicey stat in that it's subjective, and, 2 of our worst defenders are rookies, but even so, the only American League teams with more errors than the Yankees this year are Texas, Chicago, Toronto, and Baltimore. Not great company. So how much does the shoddy defense we've seen concern you? And is it possible that Cashman is overly enamored with the home run ball and not enough with pitching and defense?
Well, I mean, I'll say just overall wins are wins, and the Yankees are winning a lot of games, and they have a lot of very valuable players. And so I'm not going to go and just kind of pin all that on Brian Cashman and say he's making the wrong decision because you got some really bad defensive players. The Yankees at the moment don't have a lot of options on defense. They have nobody but Miguel Andujar to play third base, and Miguel Andujar is a horrible third baseman. They don't even really have a good option as a defensive replacement for Miguel Andujar late in games, right? Ronald Torreyes is basically playing out of position there. He's played a little bit there, but not much. Neil Walker is definitely playing out of position there. Like, you don't have that guy take advantage of a lead and try to protect it when you have probably the worst third baseman in baseball currently there. In terms of other players, I think it's kind of a little bit overblown. The Yankees defense, I think, is overall probably above average other than Miguel Andujar. Errors are a stat. If we look at other guys, like Gleyber Torres is slightly below average. Giancarlo Stanton grades out this year as slightly below average. But, this isn't a huge deal other than third base, I think, and arguably catcher. Gary Sanchez, the defensive numbers are split. It's clear that he has a pass ball issue, and maybe that bleeds over into the pitching in some ways that he can't really detect. When you actually add up all of the defensive contributions, so that's holding runners, that's framing, that's all of that, Gary Sanchez is an above-average contributor on defense. He's been worth 6 runs above the average catcher, above the replacement level catcher, according to Fangraphs. So, I think that there's a lot more to catching than just pass balls, and I'm not willing to say that there's a real problem there yet. The overall defense, I mean, look at the current pitching staff. Like, there's no. Can we really say that anybody in the pitching staff has been badly hurt by his defense this year?
It's tough. I mean, we did just see 2 out of the last 3 games, Sanchez hand the opposition runs with a combination of passed balls and throwing errors, and it did hurt us last year in that series against Houston where he also didn't hit very well. I mean, wouldn't you say there's truth to the contention that power numbers tend to go down in the playoffs against better pitching and that poor defense will tend to get exposed?
I don't know what the data say on in terms of power hitting and power pitching. My instinct is that that's probably a myth, that good pitching does do better than bad pitching, but it does better basically proportionally. In terms of Gary Sanchez's performance, I think it's really hard to judge catcher performance based upon the errors that we see on the field. Catchers do a lot of little things. You can pick these up with data in the aggregate, but they're really hard to see. Like, we don't see when when a runner on first doesn't take second base. We don't see when it's hard to see, or rather, it's hard to keep track of all of those extra framing runs, which are very important. And a pass ball, it's important. Like, yes, it matters when a runner advances on a passed ball. But it may not matter as much as getting a strike in a key position, or it might not matter as much as, preventing that batter from stealing or even catching that batter when they do steal. That's what these statistics are for. And I trust the statistics to estimate the effect of Gary Sanchez overall. And it's consistently throughout his career, they thought he's an above average catcher. And I think that there's he's got a bit of a bad reputation, in part because he's a good hitting catcher. And so we're primed to think that he's not that great of a defensive catcher. So we notice all those mistakes more. And in part because the mistakes that he does make that he's not good at, the camera's right on him. Like the camera's pointed at him every single pitch. And so you notice those mistakes more than you notice the things that it may be a little harder to see.
And you also notice it more now because he's actually not hitting.
Yeah, if you take a home run, people are like, oh, don't care, right? And when Austin Romine messes up, you think about it a little bit less.
So as I mentioned before, Cashman has pulled off some miracles in his day, but he's human, and there have been some mistakes as well. And we are rapidly approaching the third decade of the century with just one championship since 2000 to show for it. I haven't won a division title since 2012. So looking at the past 10 years or so since our last championship, what would you say, EJ, is Cashman's biggest positive and his biggest negative as well?
Sure. Let's start with the negatives. The Yankees have made some really bad signings. There were signings that haven't worked out over this time. Jacoby Ellsbury is the obvious one. I think that you can point to some, maybe the CC Sabathia re-signing, some other ones that were ill-advised. I think the absolute worst thing he did was re-sign A-Rod, and I think that's fairly clear. At the same time, a lot of the blame here, I think, can be placed upon Yankee ownership. The Yankee ownership got involved in some deals that they probably shouldn't have gotten involved in. For example, Rafael Soriano back in the day, I think, was a good example of that. But more importantly, have put really strict limits on Brian Cashman's budget. And if there's one thing we've seen among high-salary teams in baseball is high-salary teams around this kind of 180, 190 mark have not performed particularly well, right? We're talking about the Oakland Athletics and the Tampa Bay Rays as the hottest teams in baseball right now. And they're the two lowest paid teams in baseball. And there's a reason for that. It's that old players are a problem. Old players are doing worse than they ever have, probably because they're not taking performance-enhancing drugs, and therefore the Yankee model of go out and spend a lot of money isn't very effective. At some point, Cashman realized that and pivoted the Yankees to become a young team. Invested in their scouting department. They have one of the best farm systems in baseball as a result. And now year after year, the Yankees have these young players coming up. The next question is, though, but you also got the money. So what are you going to do with the money now that a lot of these bad contracts are cleared off the books, now that the luxury tax thing is hopefully behind them, and they got to spend a lot of money? And I don't think Cashman has proven yet that he knows how to spend $250 million more effectively than $150 million. And I'll be interested to see how he approaches offseason with guys like Manny Machado in their prime out there. If he decides to spend $35 million on one player instead of 20 and 15 on two players. His biggest strength have been his trades. Cashman has been a wizard of trades. We've already talked about a couple of those trades here, but I mean, just think about the Aroldis Chapman trade coming to the Yankees, where the Yankees gave up essentially nothing to get Aroldis Chapman. He got Aroldis Chapman, traded him away for an amazing package that included Gleyber Torres, and then re-signed Aroldis Chapman. Ditto for the Andrew Miller trade. That one turned out very well for the Yankees. Aaron Hicks is a great example. Didi Gregorius is an amazing example. And Giancarlo Stanton is a great example. All trades where the Yankees got something valuable and gave up very little. I think that he's got maybe the best trade record in baseball at this point. Yeah,
well, you mentioned earlier that aging players are a problem. Are you at all concerned about the length of the Stanton contract? And on the flip side, do you think Andrew McCutchen, who turns 32 in October, may be an exception in that he's a guy who's performed really well in pinstripes that the Yankees might want to sign for a few years? I mean, he could fill a real need for us in left field going forward with Gardner at the end of his contract and the ongoing injury issue with Clint Frazier.
Yeah, so let's talk about Stanton first. How good is Giancarlo Stanton? I don't know. I know that Giancarlo Stanton has had seasons where he's been an MVP or been closer to an MVP, where he's hit 59 home runs. I know he's had seasons that looked a lot like this season. His 2016 season, he had 240, 326, 489. Almost identical numbers to this season. So aging Giancarlo Stanton might just be this guy. Now, this guy's been a 3.5 win player. I think has been, maybe disappointing because his name is Giancarlo Stanton, but if you put any other name on him, he would be considered just one of the really good players in the Yankees right now. Long term, am I scared? Probably pretty scared. Yeah, I mean, that's a big contract. luckily without a huge cap hit, but still a big contract. And, 3.5 wins now might mean 2 wins in a couple of years, and that's a little bit scary. I think that at some point the Yankees, and maybe even Major League Baseball, have to be thinking about like buying out contracts or whatever they can do to get these aging players off the field, and Stan might be one of those guys. There's also a pretty solid chance, and we saw this for an extended period this season before the Aaron Judge injury and others kind of forced Stanton to play, I think, too many games. We saw like Giancarlo Stanton MVP for an extended period, at least 3 months, of him slugging well over 600. And there's a pretty good chance we get that. And we didn't get that this season. At one point, it looked like we were going to get something kind of in the middle, 530-ish slugging percentage kind of Giancarlo Stanton. And I think he got overplayed. And I think that as an aging player, as a big guy, as a guy who's had some injury issues, the Yankees were really dumb not to sit him more. And I think it was like 90 straight games he played in at one point, and that was too much. I get that Aaron Judge was out, and I get that Shane Robinson was their best option off the bench. And what they should have done is they should have found some way to trade for Andrew McCutchen earlier or something like that, because it was an unacceptable streak for Stanton, and I think it really is to blame for what happened to him.
And how about McCutchen?
I think he's good. I think there's a question of what's happening to the Yankee outfield next year. So you have Stan, Judge, Hicks locked in. They're great. That third player could be Clint Frazier. It could be Andrew McCutchen. I don't think it's going to be Brett Gardner. That's an interesting question, right? So is Clint Frazier going to recover and be effective? In the very short time that he was able to play this year due to his concussion, he was really good at AAA and wasn't all that bad in the major leagues. I would like to see Clint Frazier there. I don't know what Andrew McCutchen wants to sign for. I don't know if Andrew McCutchen is okay with the potential for being off the bench a little bit next season. I think that this logjam is not a good thing for the Yankees because they have players like Clint Frazier. But the Yankees also don't know what's wrong with Clint Frazier, and it would be bad to rely on him to be a starting player, and then all of a sudden not have that starting player and having Shane Robinson as the guy you're relying on. The Yankees have traded away a lot of outfield depth, and maybe they need to sign that extra player just to make sure they have it. So if the Yankees want to pay Andrew McCutchen a bunch of money, I'm not really going to complain. I think he's really good, but he's not the first player I sign. Okay, final question, EJ, and we really appreciate your time. It's a cliche, but it's also kind of true that if you make the postseason, anything can happen. We saw Arizona last year play the Dodgers very tough during the regular season. I think they went like 13-7 and then get swept by LA in the opening round. So what's your level of confidence heading into this wild card game? And if we get past Oakland, and that's kind of a big if, what do you think the chances are that this team can get by Boston and then either Cleveland or Houston, and at least make it to the World Series, if not win it? Gun to my head, I think that Oakland is a better team right now at this moment than the Yankees. I don't think it matters that much. I think the wild card game is pretty close to 50-50. The Yankees probably have a little bit better starting pitching coming in, but Oakland can match the bullpen for bullpen, and they're hot as hell right now. I think the Yankees match up really well against the Red Sox. The Red Sox have a bunch of left-handed pitching. Starting pitching that the Yankees get to go up against with a right-handed power-hitting lineup in Yankee Stadium in Fenway Park. And we've seen it this season. David Price does not do well against the Yankees. Eduardo Rodriguez is just horrible against the Yankees. And they've even done some damage to Chris Sale. I'm pretty confident that if the Yankees get to play the Red Sox in a 5-game series and 3 or maybe 4 of those starts are started by left-handed pitchers, that the Yankees will have a pretty decent advantage right there. I'd rather play them in a 7-game series. I'd rather more starts against left-handed pitching, not allow them to leverage their bullpen. But I'd rather face Boston right now than Oakland. And Boston does have a weakness in their middle relief. I mean, we've pretty well destroyed their bullpen all year, and that's a big deal in the postseason. The Boston I'm looking forward to, and I would love to go to a Game 5 in Boston and watch the Yankees win and hopefully get out alive. That would be fun. I think that Boston is a very good team, and even if the Yankees match up against them, they still got Mookie Betts and JD Martinez, right? And that's really good. And so it'll be a fun matchup. I'm looking forward to the rivalry coming back. But, as far as matchups go, the Yankees, I think they're going to look pretty good against that team. All right. Well done, EJ. Great having you on, as always. Love your podcast. That's the Bronx Beat Podcast, which all of our listeners should check out and subscribe to on iTunes for really high-quality, in-depth analysis of the Yankees. EJ, thanks so much for being part of the show. Hopefully we can do it again during an extended playoff run, okay? Joe, thanks for having me. We'll come back. More Bronx Bombers in just a moment.
And now the answer to today's Bronx Bombers trivia question. Who became the next Yankee captain after Lou Gehrig? The answer? D. Thurman Munson. And now, here's Joe with this week's Twitter poll.
Yes, this week's Twitter poll results are in. We asked you this. Who would be your choice for starting catcher in the wild card game on October 3rd? And 72% of our followers on Twitter at Bombers Podcast said Austin Romine, and 28% said Gary Sanchez. Yeah, I'm with the majority on this. Look, there isn't a single statistical category, including caught stealing, where everyone says Sanchez excels. There hasn't been a single category where Austin Romine hasn't gotten the better of Sanchez this year, with the exception of home runs, which, keep in mind, Sanchez has played more, 349 plate appearances compared to Romine's 257. Sanchez has 16 home runs, Romine has 10. So if you adjust that to even out the playing time, Romine has just 2 fewer, and he actually has 6 more RBIs. Romine has been a beast with runners in scoring position, and Sanchez, more often than not, far more often, has whiffed in those situations. Romine's on-base percentage is .297, not stellar, but better than Sanchez at .280. That's disastrous. OPS 720 for Romine, it's very good. 666 for Sanchez, that's an ominous number. But defensively, Sanchez has just been far worse. I mean, how do you manage to lead the league in passed balls only playing 86 games? Tough to do, but Sanchez somehow pulled it off, and everyone talks about his throwing arm, but Romine's caught stealing percentage is 2 points higher than Sanchez. Sanchez has more errors as well. So look, I don't want to labor the point here, but clearly Romine has had a better year, not only than Sanchez, but really better than every backup catcher in the American League, and better than many starting catchers, including those of the Red Sox, Astros, and Indians. And I think this notion that home runs are some kind of a cure-all for bad defense, a notion that I'm very concerned has infected the Yankees front office, that this idea will hurt us in the years to come. I mean, it's one thing to have a bad defensive outfielder, but to have a catcher with this level of incompetence, really just historically bad, it's not going to work. And the argument I get from people on Twitter is the Yankees are showing loyalty to Sanchez by continuing to go with him in the hopes that it pays off long term, which to me is an absurd argument. First of all, as I've said before, this is a performance-based business if ever there was one, sports, and a catcher with a hole in his glove who's not hitting his weight, he hasn't earned any loyalty, frankly, and his hitting since he came back from the DL has actually gotten worse, batting just .164 in September. There's pitchers in the National League who are hitting better than that. So bottom line, who gives you a better chance to win that wild card game behind the plate? That's the only criteria, or it should be. And I don't see how you can say that that player is Gary Sanchez. Now, should the Yankees give up on him? No. They're paying him next to nothing, and it's pretty rare for a guy to hit, 33 home runs with a .345 on-base percentage 1 year and then fall on his face, for good, unless they were on PEDs, which I have no reason to think Sanchez was last year when he put up those numbers. But here's what I think. Back in March, I said on this podcast that this was a make-or-break year for Greg Bird, and it was. And he broke. We traded for Luke Voigt, and he's put up just staggering numbers, and now it's an open question whether or not Bird is going to even be on the playoff roster. And to my way of thinking, next season should be make or break for Gary Sanchez. And to those who keep telling me that these errors and passed balls are correctable, we heard the exact same thing last October, the exact same thing. And not only weren't they corrected, he's gotten worse. He played 122 games last year as compared to 84 this year, and he's already exceeded last year's passed ball total. So far worse, actually, and the numbers tell the story. With Romine catching, there have been 16 wild pitches. With Sanchez behind the plate, 44. Okay? Romine has 5 passed balls. Sanchez has a whopping 17. So to me, if Sanchez next year is once again leading the league in passed balls at the All-Star break, which I see no reason not to anticipate, it's all he's ever done in his 2 full seasons, and if the hitting hasn't improved, like dramatically improved, the Yankees need to bring somebody in and make this guy compete for his job. Loyalty, it's a two-way street. And this idea that it doesn't matter about defense because we hit a lot of home runs, just keep in mind, everybody's talking about whether or not we'll catch the 97 Mariners who hit 264 home runs that year. You know how many playoff games the Mariners won that year? 1. Yeah, they got bounced out in the first round by Baltimore. So the Yankees front office needs to get with it and prioritize defense. And personally, I'd start pronto by playing Romine in that do-or-die wild card game. And the fact that Boone is already committed to Sanchez is, to me, idiotic. Why? Why did you do that? You cannot tell me that starting Sanchez, a catcher who cannot catch and hasn't hit for months, gives us a better chance to win that game. I mean, look what happened on Saturday. He single-handedly gave Baltimore a run with a passed ball that put a runner on third with one out, then a throwing error to first that scored the run from third. That run, which, by the way, extended the game into the 11th inning, and we had to use basically our entire bullpen just to scratch out that win against Baltimore. And also in that inning, and people didn't comment on this because we won the game, but the second run would have scored on that play if not for Lance Lynn's hustle to home plate. Sanchez, who moves like a snail, and by the way, I've noticed he also is not hustling to first base again either on his just innumerable groundouts. Sanchez was just nowhere to be found. He just watched that play unfold like a spectator, and then two more pass balls on Monday in Tampa, costing us a run as well. Again, just bouncing off his glove. I mean, how this guy has any defenders at this point is really just beyond my comprehension. So look, I mean, simply put, defense matters. And the facts on this are clear. Austin Romine, and I'm not saying he's, Johnny Bench, but he's been the better defensive catcher this year by far, and the better hitter as well by far. And I think Boone made a huge and completely unnecessary, unforced error naming Sanchez to be the starter in that do-or-die wildcard game where, every play is going to matter and tension's going to be high. Boone did not have to do that to make that announcement, and he shouldn't have done it. And I think, we may well live to regret it. All right, from this week's mailbag, we have two questions this week. Our first is from Taylor in Forest Hills. And by the way, the email is joe@bronxbomberspodcast.com, or you can find us on Twitter @bomberspodcast is the handle, or give us a call at 646-854-4959. If you have any questions you want to have us answer on any future episodes, we are more than happy to do so. And Taylor writes, I think you're too hard on Aaron Boone. It's only his first year, and this team will likely win 100 games. What specifically besides his media appearances don't you like about him? Well, thanks for that question, Taylor. First of all, maybe we'll win 100 games. I'm not entirely sure of that. But honestly, I think this is a 110-win team without Aaron Boone in that dugout. If Cashman had hired a guy with some experience and some competence instead of a yes man, I think different story. And since you asked, I'll give you a very specific thing I do not like about him besides his media appearances. And this may be the most important job of a big league manager, his handling of the bullpen, which I didn't always love Girardi's moves. But Boone's have been so bad, it's almost like he's trying to throw some of these games. I mean, and Sunday was a perfect example. You have a 2-run lead against Baltimore, and Boone takes out Happ, which I understood. It happened throwing 107 pitches, but a 2-run lead, and he throws EJ Cole in there, which, I mean, what is this obsession with EJ Cole? He's been absolutely horrible for well over a month, to the point that he really shouldn't be on the roster. EJ Cole, of the last 58 batters he's faced, has given up 8 home runs, 13 earned runs, and 20 hits. So, I mean, if you're going to use him, put him out there in a blowout, maybe. But a 2-run game, I'm sorry, it's absolute lunacy. And following it up with Canely, that's like putting, gasoline on the fire. He gave up another earned run after Cole gave up 3. And that's another thing. Boone not only brings in the wrong guys in the wrong situations, Taylor, he leaves them out there to twist in the wind. He just sits there and, watches them implode while he chews on his sunflower seeds. So again, this, to my mind, is the most important task of a manager, the bullpen, and we've seen bonehead move after bonehead move from Aaron Boone. He's way too slow on the uptake when it's very clear that a pitcher has nothing. I mean, it's almost as if when you hire a manager with zero experience for a team that's built to win now, you hand over winnable games to historically bad teams like the Baltimore Orioles, who are almost certainly going to fire Buck Showalter for really no good reason. I mean, no manager on earth could win with that roster. And Taylor, I can only hope that if we're bumped off in the wild card round, that Cashman sees the light and brings Showalter back. I mean, but I'm not exactly holding my breath. It's not like these guys to admit it when they're wrong, but he was indeed wrong to hire Aaron Boone. And our second question this week is from Chris in Providence, who asks, with Didi now out, what infield should we use? Excellent question, Chris. First of all, why major leaguers continue to slide head first, especially into home plate, is really beyond my comprehension. I mean, even Pete Rose, who used to do it, now says it's dumb. And it's debatable whether it's even a timing advantage. And there have been just so many injuries from this, including Gleyber Torres last year, who would have come up if not for a very similar injury. He tore his elbow in a head first slide into home plate. His hand got caught, just like Didi Gregorius's did the other day. And I saw Aaron Hicks slide this way on one of his inside the park home runs this year. I think it was in Detroit. I mean, he wasn't injured, but the catcher was like 10 feet away. There was no need for a head first slide. And honestly, whenever I see it, I cringe. I mean, not that you can't injure yourself sliding feet first, but it's just more dangerous head first. But Chris, in Didi's absence, I would slide Gleyber over to short and start Neil Walker at second base against right-handed pitching. Walker's done almost all of his damage this year batting lefty. Now, I get that Gleyber has been very error-prone this year. I think he has even more than Andujar. So I wouldn't be against throwing Hechavarria in there to preserve a lead late in games. And honestly, Hechavarria has had a few hits in pinstripes. He had a big home run. And shortstop defense is obviously super important. So against lefties, I would keep Gleyber at second and use Hechavarria at short. He's better defensively than Torres, but honestly, and I hate to say this, I really do, but this injury to Didi is a major blow to our postseason chances. I mean, which, in my opinion, weren't that high anyway, considering the competition. But Didi was one of our best performers last year in the playoffs. He's a spectacular defensive shortstop and a team leader. And we learned from Judge's absence this year, it's pretty tough to be a team leader when you're sitting on the bench. So we had issues before this injury, to be sure. Sanchez terrible, thin rotation, sputtering bullpen. But assuming Didi's out for the year, which is a pretty safe assumption, he tore cartilage in his right wrist, this could be the final death blow. But we'll see what happens. I mean, we do have decent depth, and as they say, that's why they play the games. And that'll do it for this week's episode of Bronx Bombers. Again, don't forget, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Find us on Spotify. Follow us on Twitter at Bombers Podcast is the handle. Like us on Facebook as well. But most of all, have faith in the Yankees. We'll see you again next week.